A few years back, I was on a trip with about 30 teenagers and sponsors from church, and I was responsible for all of them. We were going to be going on a camping trip. And many of these kids had never been camping before. They were teenagers. And we were not only going to be camping, we were going to be hiking. And we were going to be hiking one of my favorite hikes. If I'm honest, I think it's the best hike in our state and one of the best on the East Coast. It's called Old Rag. It's in Shenandoah National Park. It's about 10 miles and it takes about 6 hours because it is very, very strenuous. A lot of rock scrambles, some narrow passages where you have to hand over fist crawl and move. And it takes so long, I told the kids, I said, listen, we're going to be camping and then we're going to be hiking. And on the hike, you're going to need a bag. You're going to need a way to bring lunch because the hike is so long, you need to have your lunch with you. But I said, what I didn't say was you need to bring all of your camping gear on this hike because it's so long. So what you need is a small bag, just enough to carry your lunch, a little bit of water, maybe a liter of water. You should be fine with a liter of water. As is always the case, teenagers always want to prove a point. And so there were a couple of guys who decided they were going to take everything they could. And one of the boys showed up, and he had a backpack that was filled to the brim. Everything you could imagine was in there. I kid you not. You could hear him coming because he had 2 pots hanging from his back. He was going to start a fire and boil some beans at the top of this mountain. I said, buddy, you don't need all this junk. I said, I don't want to know what's in your bag, but I'm guessing you've got more than one jacket. Oh, yeah. I said, it's 65 degrees right now. It's only going to get warmer. You're not going to need more than one jacket. I said, how much food do you have? He said, I have a 5-pound can of beans. I said, do you have a can opener? He said, I have my knife. I said, you're going to cut your hand. Just leave a bunch of this junk. And everyone else had a small pack, with just enough for their lunch. But he was determined he was going to enjoy this hike with all of his stuff, all of his junk, and he'll be fine. Well, you know what happened. 3 hours later, we got to the rock scrambling portion of Old Rag where you actually have to crawl hand over fist. There are caverns and you have to squeeze through. Well, he's already taken coat number 2 off and tied it around his waist because there's no more room in that bag. And he's hitting pots and pans against the rack. I was so embarrassed with this kid. It was crowded that day. There was people everywhere. I mean, I was doing my best to stay where I could see him but not be with him. You know what I mean? It was embarrassing. And by the end, he got up to the top, man. He was pouring sweat, just exhausted. So I said, hey, man, what else do you have in there? And he started pulling out anything you could think of. Magazines. I don't know why he thought he was going to need magazines. All kinds of stuff he wanted to take with him on this hike. We got to the top. He thought, well, it's better now because we're going downhill. I said, not quite, buddy. It's pretty steep downhill, and it's still a little bit of a workout, and your bag is still heavy because you brought a bunch of stuff with you, and even his food trash was heavy because it was metal cans. It was ridiculous. He had quite the day that day. We got home that night, and he told his parents, man, he was exhausted. He was worn out. All the other kids were fine. Why? Because he had all this stuff in his bag. Last week, we talked about traveling light, and I think what I'm afraid is some of you heard me say is don't take anything. This morning, I want to talk to you about what we need when we travel light. And we're going to talk about one more thing we're going to let go of. Last week, we talked about letting go of baggage, right? The things that are emotionally tearing us apart, the things that are physically holding us back. And today I'm going to talk about one more thing to let go of, but I'm going to talk about a few things we need to take hold of. And you're going to realize as we read through these verses that, man, this is going to fall right in line with Thanksgiving, absolutely. In Psalm 100, verse 4, we know that the writer said, enter his gates with thanksgiving, his courts with praise, give thanks to him, bless his name. We are to be a people of thanksgiving. In verse 18 of 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul put it this way, give thanks in all circumstances. Regardless of where I find myself today, I'm encouraged to be thankful. And it is when we're around people who have less than us and can still be thankful that we find this spirit of thanksgiving goes deeper than we thought. He said, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. God may not have revealed his specific will for you yet. Many of us are still struggling with God's general will. But God's will for every one of you who call yourself a believer is that you would be thankful. You would be people who give, who offer thanksgiving often. And this is not always easy. This is not always simple. And he says in all circumstances we can give thanks. In Colossians 4 and verse 2, he put it this way, continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. Often Paul marries thanksgiving to prayer. He says, the more prayerful I am, the more thankful I am. The more thankful I am, the more given to prayer I am. And they go together very well. He put it this way in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6. Don't be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with, there it is again, thanksgiving. Often Paul would open a letter and he would put it this way. I prayed for you, church at Colossae. I prayed for you, Christians in Rome. I prayed for you and I gave thanksgiving for you. He was often praying and giving thanks. Let your requests be made known to God. I want you to understand this morning that thanksgiving, thankfulness, is supposed to be a part of our lives as believers. And so this morning, I want us to not just let go of baggage, but this is going to be harder this morning. I'm going to talk to you about how we are to let go of the old you, the old me, the old us. In Colossians chapter 3, Paul lays out for us what it looks like to actually let go of the old you. And this morning, I'm not just going to tell you what to let go of, because there's going to be a turn in the passage. See, the point of this series, Travel Light, is not just to take nothing with you, okay? When you go on a trip, you need to take what you need to take, but you don't need to take extra stuff, extra junk. Why? The airline is going to charge you more for it. You're not going to have enough room in the car because of it. We want to take what's necessary, but nothing more. And so this morning, I want to share with you some things God told us to let go of that are from our past, that are the old us, and then what he tells us to take hold of in replace of. Verse 1 in Colossians chapter 3 said, if you've been raised with Christ. I want to make this very clear right away. This morning, not every morning, but this morning specifically, the things I'm going to say are applicable to believers. If you're in this room and you've been raised with Christ, you're a believer in Jesus, you have trusted him, you're a follower of Christ, he says, if this is true, seek the things that are above. When this was written, it would be read publicly in the church. The church at Colossae, that was the name of the town, they would gather together and they would say, guys, we have a letter from the Apostle Paul. He came, he helped us start this church, and so now we're going to read this letter. And they would all gather and they would listen. And he said, if you are here this morning, right, when they gather or when you gather now, if you're here and you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. He goes on to put it this way in verse 2. Set your minds. He says, I know you're going to have a hard time seeking. We tend to look at what we see. We tend to look at what's physical. He says, so set your minds on the things that are above, not on the things that are on earth. We're going to get into what those things are here in just a second. Verse 3, for you have died. He makes it crystal clear. You have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God. Part of trusting Jesus with our life is acknowledging that we're broken and the old us needs to die. Like, I'm no longer living for me. I'm honoring Jesus. Verse 4, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. If I'm going to let go of the old me, the first way we do that is by letting go of an old way of thinking. He said, set your minds, set your hearts, set the things you think about on the things above. Here's the truth of the matter. A lot of us struggle with our actions because we haven't taken control of our thoughts. A lot of us struggle with the words that we say to people and the way that we react to people because we have not set our minds on the things that are above. I want you to hear me say this because I hear it said a lot. We don't live in a world that glorifies living the new you. We live in a world that glorifies the old you. And here's what people say. Boy, you better be glad I'm not who I was. Boy, you better be glad I'm not the way that I was before. Hear me. I am. God is glad that we are not. That's the whole point. We're letting go of the old us. And the old us absolutely is vengeful, spiteful, angry. We seek our own. We look for what makes us happy and we could care less about others. And so we have to, if we're going to begin to let go of the old self, we really have to let go of the way that the old self thought about itself. And here's how a lot of us thought, and this is what's true, right? When we were kids, we all thought the world revolves around me. And we've all met people who don't realize the world doesn't revolve around them. And part of following Jesus is realizing we're not the center of the universe. It is not just about us. It's not about just getting our way. And so we have to make an effort to change the way we think. Paul put it this way in another passage. He said, here's the things you need to think on. Whatever is true, whatever is honest, whatever is of good report, whatever is lovely, right? And that's not, here's the trouble with that. He was writing that to a group of people who, yes, had cultural pressure, who absolutely had different thoughts in their mind. I'll give it to you, you've got a little bit of a disadvantage this morning. You've got a thought creator in your hand constantly. You weren't thinking about nothing, but then you saw something on there that made you think about it. You were minding your own business until you got that text from somebody. You were doing your own thing until somebody tagged you in a post. You weren't bothered by something and then you saw it. And immediately your mind began to think on it. We are creatures of habit. And whatever we think about, whatever we plan out, whatever we constantly dwell on, we end up doing. Long before somebody leaves their spouse, long before somebody cheats on their wife or their husband, long before somebody takes money from the company, long before we do the things we know we'll regret, we've thought about it over and over and over and over. And we are inundated with things that are not true, not lovely, not of good report. I understand that. So we have to learn how to actively make the difference as believers. But before we get caught up here, I want you to see how different thinking leads to different living, okay? Because we don't want to just let go of the old way of thinking. We also want to let go of the old way of living, and he outlines that in verse 5. Read with me. Put to death. Strong words. He says, kill this off. This has got to die for you. Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you. And here's what it is. Sexual immorality, impurity. This word passion, it's not just like being passionate. There's nothing wrong with being passionate about sports. There's nothing wrong with being passionate about something you care about or your wife or good things. But the idea here is an inordinate passion, a passion for what is wrong, for what is evil, for what is wicked. Impurity, passion, evil desire, and then he turns, covetousness, which is idolatry. There are two sins he's outlining here, the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes. The lust of the flesh is the things we do that make us feel good. That's that sexual immorality, impurity, that passion. And then there's the lust of the eyes, that evil desire or covetousness. That's when we don't just want stuff. Stuff becomes what we worship. It's all about reaching that next level and having or obtaining or owning that. I wish I could look at you this morning and say, Pastor Mark is beyond this, but I still struggle right here. You know why? Because I see stuff that I like. I see stuff that looks good. I see stuff that I want. And I begin wondering, man, what would it feel like to drive that? What would it be like to own that? What would it be like to live there? What would it be like to be that? And he says, it's one thing to covet. It's one thing to want stuff. It's another thing when the want and the covetousness turns into idolatry. It's when we take God's creation and we make it better than the Creator. Right? And we can do this with good things too. Right? We do this all the time. We take sex, something that God created that's good, and we make it the only thing, the thing we live for, and we worship it, and it's all about getting that. Or we take work. God created work. Work is good. I hope you know that you can honor God in your work. Even if you're not a missionary or a pastor or a Sunday school teacher, your work matters. Our work, we were actually created to work. Some of us have this idea that when we get to heaven, we're going to kick back on a hammock, right? The idea is we were created to create. We were created to work. We were created to make things. That's why it feels so good when we do something and we do a good job on it and we look back and say, man, that is good. That is us reflecting the image of God in our lives. It says that God created the world. He stepped back and every day he would say, that is good. That feeling that you have when you create something, when you make something, when you contribute, when you don't just take from this world, but you put something into the world, it feels good because you were created to do that. And heaven will be eternity, not just of kicking back and somebody putting grapes in our mouth. No, it's the idea of constantly doing what we were created to do. We will be in worship of God, and we will not just lay around, but we will be in busy activity that honors God. And I don't know if it'll look like us making things. I don't know if we're going to be artists. I'm not saying we're going to be musicians, but we're going to be in a constant mode of what we are actually created to do. And here's the truth. You know this. We weren't created to do nothing. How many of us could share stories of people who quit their job and sank right into a depression? Or we thought if we could get to retirement, that was going to be it. And the first weekend, you loved it. But then the second week, you're like, I got to do something. I got to be making something. I got to be contributing in some way because there's this desire in us to do. We were created to move. We were created to act. We were created to make, to create, to produce. And the opposite is when we make the thing we produce, the thing we worship. The people of Israel dealt with this, and so did the New Testament church. Notice this, verse 6, on account of these, the wrath of God is coming. When we take good things and we ruin them. The desires of our body, we make them what we worship. The things we see with our eyes, we make that what we worship. Verse 7, and this is where it gets good, and this is where we get honest. In these you too once walked. He said, now church, don't play Christian with me. We've all been there. When you were living in them. We have all walked in these things. There have been seasons in our life before Jesus, before we gave our life to God, where we just did whatever felt good. We chased whatever we saw with our eyes. And for some of us, it took a little longer to reach the bottom of that. For some of us, it took decades of striving, of trying to get that thing, that relationship or that stuff or that money before we realized it was empty. But then verse 8, he says, but now you must put them all away. Anger, wrath, malice, slander, obscene talk from your mouth. He says, get rid of them. You've got to let them go. Verse 9, don't lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices. A whole bunch of us like talking about how we are a new person, how we put off the old self. He says, no, with its practices. This is how we know. Now, I want to encourage you. Some of you hear me say that, and you say, oh, Pastor Mark, there's times when I still do the things that I used to do. I want to emphasize this word practices, okay? The scriptures do not teach. I know there are Christians that believe this, and I'm going to outline the difference here. There are Christians who believe that you can reach a point in salvation where you no longer sin. You are sinless in your perfection. Now, we're all going to be sinless in perfection in heaven, but the people I meet who believe that, when I ask them, okay, you believe that's possible, have you done it? They always say, no. They believe it's a thing you could do, but not many people do. I've yet to meet someone who can say, Pastor Mark, I have grown in my faith to the point where I am sinlessly perfect. I don't meet those people. What I see taught in the New Testament is a lifestyle. It's not that I never fail. It's that whereas before, my lifestyle, my practice was constantly doing what's wrong, doing what dishonors God and not really caring, my new practice, not 100%, but my new lifestyle is I'm trying to honor God. Do I slip up? Yes. But I'm moving in this direction. You know what I'm saying? I've turned the car around. It may not be going as fast or as far as I'd like, but I'm doing my best to honor God. Now I'm going to screw up. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to burst out in anger and say some things I regret. I may still cuss people out from time to time, and I feel bad about it, and I repent of it, but I'm not that guy who just cusses people out and walks away and doesn't feel any shame or guilt over it, and I'll do it again because I don't care. It's about me and not about you. I'm a new person. I have new lifestyle. I have new practices. And here's the good news. This is not the end of the passage. Some of you were raised in a church where you were just taught all the things you don't do. You don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do this, and you don't do that. You don't have a good time, and you don't feel good, and you don't smile, and you don't enjoy church. You just come and do it because it's what we do. No, that's half the gospel, all right? Jesus says, put this off, and then in verse 10, Paul puts it this way, you've put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge after the image of its creator. He says, you are now a mirror. You are reflecting your Creator. And so what happens is the more time that I spend with God, the more I become like God. When I was in 7th grade, I remember when I was hanging out with kids that skateboarded. You know what I wanted to do? I wanted to skateboard. I couldn't skateboard, but I wanted to skateboard because the cool kids, they had skateboards. I got a little bit older and all the cool kids were playing basketball. So you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to play basketball. And I was one of those kids, man. I was water. Wherever you put me, that's what I was. I would fit right into the mold. I would be like the kids around me. And what it was whoever I was spending time with, man, I'd talk like them. I'd act like them. I'd dress like them. And if we're all honest, that's what we do as humans. We typically tend to reflect the culture. You say, no, not me. I fight against the culture. I go against the grain. Most of us, if we're honest, we're the result of a lot of pressures around us and a lot of influences around us. This is reflected in the way that we dress, the cars that we drive, the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we think about our lives. Should we? Yes, we should attempt to not allow culture to influence us, but here's what we have to adjust to. Somebody is influencing you, okay? There's no way around it. We are typically mirrors. We reflect what we see. And so my problem with it is not that you're a reflector or not that you're a mirror. My question to you is, who is it that you're spending the most time with? See, what we try to do is we say, well, I'm going to go to church and I'm going to be a good Christian. If you're here on a Sunday, maybe you get here 15 minutes early and the service goes about an hour and 10 hours and 15 minutes, right? Depending on how long Pastor Mark talks. We're here for 90 minutes. In 90 minutes, it's really hard for you to spend time with God, spend time with other believers, and reflect God's values if the other 168 hours of the week, you're just kind of free-floating, listening to whoever and whatever. Right? So what ends up happening is we spend more time around people we barely know. If I'm honest, look, there are days that I'm influenced more by people I can never see. Like I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I may listen to 4 or 5 hours of podcasts while I'm working or while I'm going about my day. I won't spend 4 or 5 hours talking to my wife, who I see more than anybody. And so on that particular day, there's someone else who has influenced me. Nothing wrong with podcasts, nothing wrong with being influenced. It's just we have to know who is it we're allowing to influence our lives. So here's my question to you, and I'll move on. Who or what is influencing you the most? It's really hard to be a Christian who follows Jesus passionately if we're just giving him 90 minutes a week. So that's why I tell you every week, man, you've got to find time to spend time with God. You've got to create a schedule and a rhythm where you're listening to God's word on your way to work, or you're praying on your way home from work, but you're making sure every day you are being influenced by God. And here's why. Because the more time I'm around God, the more I am going to reflect his image, and I'm going to live that out. And that's what it means to take hold of a new life. So let go of the old me, let go of the old way of thinking, the old way of living, and now we can take hold of new life. And here's why that matters, okay? When I was hiking with that kid, before we started up that mountain, I tried my best. I put his bag down. I was like, look, buddy, I don't need to know what all is in your bag, but you're going to have to let go of some stuff. We got to get some junk out of there. And he's like, nah, I need all this stuff. I was like, you don't need all this stuff. And he just fought me tooth and nail. He's like, I'm not taking anything out of my bag. I said, bud, you have got to get rid of some stuff. And I showed him my bag. My bag was tiny. I said, all I have in here is a few snacks, a light lunch, and some water. That's all you need, bud. You're not going to want all this stuff. He's like, no, I need it all. And so then I said, okay, well, do you have water in there? And he said, no. I said, bud, you've got to have water on this hike. He went to his car and he grabbed a 2-gallon jug of water with a handle. He said, I'm going to carry it like this. I said, oh man, buddy, that water should be in that pack. He's like, there's no room. I said, something's got to go. Here's what I want you to understand, Christian. There's a whole lot of us. Man, we are struggling up this mountain of life. We are on this journey, and our pack is weighing us down. And then we get saved. We come to church, right? And here's what we do. We say, I love it. I love the gospel. I want to be gracious. I want to be forgiving. I want to be kind. I want to be compassionate. I want to be like Jesus. I want to read my Bible. I want to pray. And what we do is we take our bag that's already full, and we try to put all of this in there too. And we shove it down in there. And we want to be a good Christian on top of all the stuff. And Jesus is saying, hey, bud, hey, we got to let some stuff go out of this bag. We got to get rid of some of this. This anger, it can't be in here with grace. They can't both fit. And so we need to, before we put grace in there, we got to kind of work on your anger. All right, dude, let's pull that out of your bag. Oh, no, I like having that. It feels well. I know it feels good. But man, grace feels better. I promise you grace will take you farther. I promise you your journey will be lighter. Hey, can we read a few of the things Jesus wants us to put in our bag? Read with me in Colossians chapter 3, verse 11, because now we've made the turn. He says, listen to this new life. This new life is good. Number one, he says, here there is not Greek, Jew, circumcised, uncircumcised, barbarian, skid, slave, free, but Christ is all in all. This is important. I want you to see this. Before he starts talking about how we live differently in the new life, he says, here's the beauty of the new life. There's no more division. Can I tell you about the old us? Can we just acknowledge some truth? The old us, natural man. Do you know what we are good at as men and women in planet Earth? Division. Looking at one another and saying, how much do you make? How much do you make? Okay, you stay over there, you stay over there. What color is your skin? What color is your skin? All right, separate. Where are you from? Where are you from? All right, y'all don't like each other. Not no more, you don't. How educated are you? How educated are you? All right, you don't hang out. Blue collar, white collar, keep it that way. We put people in boxes, and we have lines of separation. I've shared this with you before. These churches Paul was writing to, many of them were cities that were diverse. And here's what I mean by diverse. There was a Gentile section of town, and there was a wall around it to keep the Jews out, to keep the Scythians out, to keep the barbarians out. There was a wall around the Jews in this part of town, and they kept their people in there, and they didn't let their people out. At night, everybody went back to... Now, they'd come together during the day, how are you? Nice to see you. But at night, they ate dinner with people who looked like them. They spent time with people who looked like them, and it was all about keeping people separated. But then historians tell us, specifically in Corinth, that this beautiful thing began happening. Every night, Christians would begin climbing walls to worship together, regardless of race, culture, even language barriers. Because something more important than all the things we've mentioned that divide us united them. Jesus. So in this new life, there's no room for bigotry, for racism, for assumptions. He says, no, we are part of this beautiful body. Then verse 12, he says, put on then. Now, we've taken some things out of the bag. We got rid of the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, covetousness, idolatry. We've got those out. Made room. Put on, as God's chosen holy ones, beloved, compassionate hearts. Should bother us when we see brokenness in this world. Should bother us when children are hungry, regardless of what color their skin is, regardless of whether or not they followed laws or their parents followed. When we see problems in this world, we should be people of compassionate hearts. Follow me. Kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. I'm going to do my best in this passage to outline every verb. Notice the next one. Bearing, it's a verb, bearing with one another. Some of us have a hard time with words like humility and patience because we don't know what to do there. Bearing one another, we know what that looks like. Many of us just did that on Thursday and Friday, amen, with our family. We bear with each other. And if one has a complaint against each other, forgiving. See, there's first level, bearing with one another. That's when we say, I will go to church with you. I will attend group with you. I will even call you a friend, but I will not forgive you if you cross me. Being a believer is more than just bearing with one another. It's forgiving. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also. I don't know how many of you know the difference. A lot of times people use the word should when they really mean must. In this passage, the word must is important. If somebody says you should do something, and it's in a contract, like, you should. But if it's in a contract that you must, you have to. So you also. Can you hear me? Now, if you're a believer in the room, I want you to hear me. We are required to forgive. Forgiveness, I always want to tell you this, is not telling people what they did was okay. You can say it was not okay what you did, but I forgive you. Forgiveness is not meaning that we're not going to go to the law if the law needs to be involved in something someone did to someone that loves us. Like, look, you can forgive. Forgive is saying, I'm not going to allow a grudge to rob me of my relationship with God, and I'm going to love you because God has called me to love and forgive even my enemies. Verse 14, and here's the real key. And above all of these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Paul said, if I have charity, if I have good works, if I give to the poor, if I feed hungry mouths, if I have the gift of prophecy, if I teach great sermons, but I don't have love, I am noise in a noisy world. Love is what makes this work. Verse 15, and this is why. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be, wait a minute, here we are again. I want you to see how he closes out this little section here. And be thankful. Verse 16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. Before we go on, too many of us know the word of God, but it doesn't dwell in us. And here's the difference. Somebody who knows the word of God, they use it to beat people up. They use it to quote. They could quote it to you. They will use it in an argument. They could even talk deep down, profound theology, but they don't live it. Theology is useless and baseless if you don't live it. This is the idea of not just knowing Jesus' words. And by the way, these are Jesus' words. Like he says, the things Jesus taught you, let them dwell in you. Let them dwell in you in such a way where you just begin living them and doing them. Teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom. There's some more verbs. Teaching, admonishing. You can't help but pour this out, all of this knowledge you've gotten from God, all of this wisdom, all of this spiritual growth you've got. Singing, another verb, psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts. Thankfulness, again, in the form of thanking God through song. There's this idea that we're to be people who are doing these things, these verbs, living and singing and being forgiving. These are how we know we've put off the old self, taken hold of the new self. We're not perfect. We're not every day. But there should be moments where our kids catch us. There should be moments where people catch us singing, forgiving, and bearing with people that no one else can bear with, right? It's not easy, but we find a way to do it. Why? Verse 17, whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks 3 times. This Thanksgiving weekend, I want you to see that thankfulness isn't just a good quality. It's one of the main things Paul encourages us to take hold of and to put into our bag as we go through this life. To God the Father through him. I want to make this abundantly clear the best way I know how. You are going to take things with you in this life. The purpose of this series is not for you to go through life with nothing, but for you to take hold of what matters and to let go of what doesn't. And so when I talk to you about taking out your bag and removing what was mentioned, that bitterness, that unforgiveness, and taking them out of your bag and putting these in, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Your bag will still be full, but it's going to feel so light. It's going to feel so much better. My wife and I, when we travel and we go hiking, y'all know we love camping and hiking, we go on trips, we've been through a lot of different day packs. We have now narrowed it down. There's this one 18-liter day pack, and guess what? It wasn't the most expensive one we bought. It wasn't the coolest one. It didn't have the most pockets. It's just the one that works best for us, and we always take it. Whenever we go somewhere, we take it. It's one of our bags we've got to take with us. It has just enough room for our lunch, some snacks, and enough water for the two of us, and we'll go hiking, and we'll switch between, so neither of us has to carry the burden the whole time. And I'm telling you, we hike past people with these big, heavy bags, with these exhausted looks on their face, and it feels so good. Because we have what we need. We've got water. We've got snacks. We've got all the things we need. I even got a little first aid kit in there the size of my hand that just in case anything terrible happens, we're covered. We got what we need, but it's not weighing us down. Can I be your pastor for a moment? I see people every day. Some of you, some of the people I work with, some people who I come into contact with, and they are beat down, worn out, and struggling to get through this life because their bag is just so full. And they come to me for help. They come to the church, they go to the Word, and what they receive is more stuff. They say, oh, I need more grace, so I need to put grace in my bag. I need more forgiveness. And so what they do is they try to stuff it in the bag. And here's the worst part, is I have to go back and say, no. The reason your bag doesn't have room for grace is you haven't dealt with bitterness. You haven't dealt with unforgiveness. You haven't dealt with the things you're still chasing with this life. The lust of the eyes, those things, those inordinate desires, the sexual immorality, we got to deal with that. And I know you don't want to deal with that. And you don't want to talk with me about that because it's weird. But I'm telling you, if we can deal with that, we can make room for a much lighter load. Oh man, but over and over, just like that teenage boy, they look me in the face and they say, but I want to take this too. And I say, dude, bud, that's not how it works. You got to let go of one to take hold of the other. Too many of us are trying to receive half the gospel. And it works like this. We either receive the half where we take grace and we try to add it to all the things we haven't got rid of, or we take the other side. We try to just get rid of stuff and we don't ever receive the grace. The forgiveness, the singing, the thanksgiving. This is who we are called to be. I know I just read a lot to you, so I'm going to do my best to sum it up with 3 simple words that I see here. When I take hold of new life and my bag is light and I'm walking on my journey so I can go faster and farther than I ever thought possible, there are 3 verbs that we read through that I think are going to be abundantly clear in your life. Number 1, I'm going to be a person who forgives. Number 2, I'm going to be thankful. I'm going to be a person who gives thanks. Number 3, love is going to be a verb, a noun, an adjective, an everyday part of my life. Forgive, thank, love. The reason Paul married love, thanksgiving, and prayer together so well in this passage is this. The more time I spend praying and thanking God for what he's given me, the more loving, forgiving, and thankful person I can be. And boy, it is attractive. I was in a meeting recently at FedEx, and they were outlining some changes that were going to come to our benefits. And nobody likes sitting through those meetings. And of course, one of the changes was it was going to cost us a little bit more for our health care. And I've shared with you guys before, we have great health care at FedEx, and I'm very thankful for the health care they offer us. And boy, it was not a pleasant room. Everybody in the room was pretty upset. There was another gentleman in the room who seemed to have a pretty good head on his shoulders, and I could see him doing the math. And finally, he raised his hand and said to the lady who was getting beat down with she was getting basically cussed out. It was rough. He said, hey, if I'm doing my math right, it's going to cost me $150 more a month. She said, yeah. He said, all right, well, even still, that's going to be $800 cheaper than my health care was before I got this job. I saw what he was doing, so I was like, yeah, if you tripled what I pay for my health insurance here, it's still cheaper than what most people pay. And I look at him, he looks at me. No one else is hearing it. They're just angry. They're mad. There's money coming out of their pocket. After the meeting, the healthcare lady came up to us, and she was talking to us, and he said, I get it. It's expensive, but it's still a great benefit, and it's still, even with this added cost. And you know what happened over the next couple of days? A bunch of the guys I work with They would come up to me after shift or before shift, and they'd say, hey, Mark, I want you to look at my healthcare. I must not be hearing what you're hearing. You must understand something here. Why is this good? Why is this bad? Blah, blah, blah. They did the same thing to the other buddy that was, had a good level head on his shoulders. You know what happened? Because he was thankful for something that other people couldn't see. Now they came to him. It attracted them to him. Too many of us Christians, man, we want to get the world saved. Let's win the world to Jesus. And so what we do is we try to come up with ways to do it. We're like, what we need to do is we need to have cool invite cards. Guys, we have cool invite cards in the lobby, all right? But that's not why people get saved and trust Jesus, right? That's not even why they're going to come with you on Christmas Eve service for their Christmas service on December 22nd. People are going to come with you because you love people, because you forgive people, and because you're thankful. If you don't do those things and you hand them the coolest invite card, we have the best sermon series. I mean, we have laser lights out in the parking lot. It's unreal. If we have all those things, but you're not loving, forgiving, and thankful, they're not coming with you. They don't want to be what you are. When I'm loving, when I'm gracious, man, when I am just like Jesus, it attracts people to you. And they come to you with their problems. And they share things with you you never thought they'd share with you. The more I live like Jesus, the more Jesus builds his church. And the people I've been praying for, God begins to work in their heart. So I want to encourage you as we close. This is a heavy passage. I know that. I know that as I've read, some of you have been convicted. You've said, man, I still do those things. I want to encourage you. It's a lifestyle, not a one-time action. By the way, that's salvation too. So many people are like, well, I prayed and asked Jesus in my heart. I don't go to church, didn't change my life, but I said the right words. Salvation is not a one-time action. It's a one-time decision that leads to a lifestyle of change. Not perfection, but different desires, a different life altogether. Can I encourage you as we close? Pastor Mark has a pretty heavy bag because there are some of these things we've read that this morning it's been made clear to me I still hide in my bag, and I'm going to share a few of them with you because I don't want you to feel like you're alone. The enemy is constantly telling you you're all alone. No other Christian deals with this. We're all dealing with these things. Hear me. One of the things that robs me of joy and makes my bag heavier than it should be is I have a compartment in my bag that is just perfectly designed for bitterness. It holds on to it, remembers everything that was ever said. There are people that did or said something to me when I was 13, and I still deal with bitterness and unforgiveness in my heart. I am not like Jesus in the way that I should be. I struggle with it. I wish I could get over it. But I'm prone and given to bitterness. There's another part of my bag that is hard for me to deal with, and that's covetousness. And I'm not just saying I like new things and seeing fancy cars. I'm telling you that I'm that guy. When I see something nice, I don't just want it. I think about it. You say, what's wrong with that? No harm, no foul. It's just wanting stuff. Yeah, but it becomes an issue when it's all I think about. And I begin devising ways where I could move money around, move my schedule around, maybe work extra hours, because I got to get that thing. I got to own that thing. I got to wear that. I got to look like that. I got to be that. And it robs me of time, energy, passion, purpose, joy, you name it. Because in my bag, way down in the bottom, the parts we don't talk about, I got some bitterness over here, some unforgiveness partnered with it, and a whole big area of covetousness. I don't let this burden me down like, oh, I'm not perfect, woe is me. No, but I need to deal with it. Because the more room I make in my bag, the more forgiveness, grace, and thanksgiving I can put in my bag. So I know the drill. Some of you this morning, you're still that teenage boy, and I know you're going to walk out of here saying, no, I can fit it all. Hey, it's okay. You may not be ready today, but I want to encourage you with this. This morning, there's a pastor here, a whole host of leaders in this church, a whole congregation who are rooting for you, love you, like you are dealing with some things in their own bag. And this morning, we're not trying to add to our bags together. We're trying to help one another remove the stones, remove the weights, remove the burdens, so that you can go farther and go faster. You may not get it today. You may not be ready next week. But hear me. God in heaven didn't just send his son so you could get to heaven. He said, I sent Jesus so that you might have life more abundantly. You may have true life. Take hold of what real life is all about. And he's looking at our bag saying, boy, it could be lighter, dude. But you could be going so much faster. This won't happen overnight. It takes real work to dig through our bags. But when you're ready, there's a church here. There's believers in this room who'd love to help you unpack, share with you how they unpacked, so that you can make room for what matters. I don't want you walking through life with a bag full of junk weighing you down and you holding on to water, the necessity, the best you can. I want you to make room for what really matters.